today, I would like to introduce a topic on our faith, hope, and love series. Really excited as we've been taking time to go through like what God is showing us, like what is the measure of faith that is really active in our lives today. And I think there's part of what Tim has shared a couple weeks ago, really looking at what some of these factors are, like what is affecting you, how are you going forward with your faith? Is it something that's active in your life every day? Is there an area of your life that's something God is still activating you and working with you in your faith? And I recognize in my own life that there are areas that God is working on me to see my faith in every single context. So I'd like to look through some scripture today as we think about a particular context, a little bit difficult one. This is from 1 Kings chapter 17. If you have a Bible with, we're going to be spending our time there in 1 Kings chapter 17. This is a story of Elijah when God is calling him to go into this land. And even though there's a drought that's coming, he has a way of protecting Elijah during that time. So I'd like to read there 1 Kings chapter 17, beginning in verse 1. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, his king, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word." Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah, "Leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have ordered the ravens to feed you there." So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan, and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. Now, just to think of these verses so far, God calls Elijah to go to this land and just to stay there. Then God provides him. It says meat and bread. Now, this is not natural for ravens to bring meat and bread. Now, if you've ever met a raven, they would tend to simply eat whatever is in front of them and not really care about what others are thinking, right? And in this case, God actually said that I will supply for you. And it's like, you will drink from the brook, and I have ordered the ravens to feed you there. I tend to think about this as, is Elijah like putting in his menu request? You know, I'd like whole wheat bread. I'd like it lightly buttered, perhaps toasted. I'd like a certain type of meat and so forth. Elijah just absolutely trusts that God is going to provide for him exactly what he needs. And this is an area, I think, that when God calls us to do something, do we trust him that he's going to be faithful in every step of that process? And I recognize in my own life, I see him doing a certain level, and then sometimes I tend to put a limit on what I believe God can do. I don't know if you've had that same experience, that I'm taking a look at my own life. Is there a context that I'm still working on this, building strength in that area? And I see that Elijah did what God said, and he was fed by the ravens. So it says, the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. So at least he got 2 solid meals every day. Verse 7, sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Now, what do you think that felt like to Elijah? He was counting on the brook to live from as well. And suddenly his source of water is gone. Now, just drinking from a brook, I don't know if you've been in the outdoors and you see some water that appears to be clean, it's usually not a good idea to drink immediately from a brook. You could get some type of stomach virus. There are a lot of things that can be carried in that water. But see, in this case, Elijah trusts God to provide for him from this brook. And now the brook itself dried up. Now notice, this is in alignment with the drought that's on the land. And so you think about it, it's like a prophetic sign that the land is no longer providing the way that it had. And so now Elijah has to go through a season of drought, and he has to survive that drought, and he still has to believe that God is providing for him in the drought. And now, right immediately after this, after the brook dried up, verse 8, then the word of the Lord came to him. Go at once to Zarephath of Sidon and stay there. I have commanded a widow in that place to supply you with food. Now, notice he uses the same language. I've commanded a widow there to supply you with food, as he commanded the ravens to supply him with food. And this is such an amazing story. We see both the widow and the ravens listening to God and providing. It's amazing. Verse 10, so he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink? As she was going to get it, he called, and bring me, please, a piece of bread. And now the widow has to really be thinking, oh my goodness, this man has come from far off. He's asking from me for something I don't have. Just notice, she says, as surely as the Lord your God lives, she replied, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. Just to put yourself there in this story, this widow is in a very tough place. This drought has hurt her very hard. And she's in a place where it's difficult to have faith to even get through, to survive. She doesn't know how she's going to survive, in fact. At this point, verse 13, Elijah said to her, don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first, make a small cake of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son. Now, if I was the widow in that case, that just doesn't seem to make sense, to take that little bit that you have and provide a little bit for this stranger who's asking for it. Yet she does exactly as she is commanded. And verse 14 says, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord gives rain on the land. She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. And for the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. So the son is not doing well. Just a moment, I lost my spot here. Okay, he grew worse and worse and finally stopped breathing. She said to Elijah, what do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son? Elijah takes a moment now. He says, give me your son. He took him from her arms, carried him to the upper room where he was staying, and laid him on his bed. Then he cried out to the Lord, O Lord my God, have you brought tragedy also on this widow I'm staying with, by causing her son to die. Then he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried out to the Lord, O Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him. The Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him, and he lived. Elijah picked up the child, carried him down from the room into the house. He gave him to his mother and said, Look, your son is alive. And the woman said to Elijah, Now I know that you're a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth. Now, this story is one of believing in God's promises. It's a story of faith that will not give up in the midst of impossible circumstances. See, the drought was hitting everyone in the land, including Elijah, including this widow. And the drought itself, it takes no mercy on the widow, takes no mercy on Elijah, and they have to deal with the consequences. And really, this drought had come because of the unbelief of the nation of Israel at that time. It was really a difficult situation that the king was not leading people to God in that time. And in this, we see God's hand in every part, in every step. You notice that the way the woman had provided for Elijah as she was commanded, that she is simply taking one step. Even in the midst of this challenging time, she only has just a little bit. It seems really familiar as in the fish and the loaves provided to Jesus. There's just a little bit, not enough to hardly make a dent in anything, but yet it becomes the provision for that whole period of time. And see, we recognize it's a period of years that Elijah stays with this woman, and there's barely even enough for one meal. And this miraculous supply is something that really is the provision of God. It is God providing in a way that we don't understand. Now, I don't know if you've been in this situation. You're trying to get through a difficult season. You're trying to get through a difficult circumstance. You don't know exactly what to do, but you realize, hey, I can take this one step. I have this little thing. And now the real question is, can I take this little thing that I have? Can I offer it to God? Can I allow him to allow it to sustain me? And say, God, can you use this thing that I have? And can you cause it to grow me? Because really what had happened in this whole story was a faith in God's provision grew as a result. Elijah's faith in God to provide was put to the test. The widow's faith in God to provide was put to the test. Now you see, the woman had to rely on Elijah to be there. And even when her son died, she was trying to blame Elijah for this. Elijah takes the son upstairs, and he doesn't want to do this in front of the widow, but he says, God, I have trusted you to provide for us in this time, and now you've allowed for the son to die. May it not be so. And he takes these matters to his own hands, and God hears his cry that this is not for the widow to suffer loss during this time. So you see there, the faith is put to the test in so many areas here, but in every circumstance, we see God being faithful to his promise to sustain, to provide. And what we recognize in this whole message is that this is something of listening to God. Make me a cake. I can think of like nursery rhymes, bake me a cake as fast as you can. And The fact is, making a cake out of that little bit does not make any sense. Like, there isn't even enough there for a cake. There isn't enough for a single meal. It's just enough to sustain for a little bit longer, and then the widow is going to perish with her son. That's what it looks like. Yet that making of the cake is what God is asking us to do. He's asking us to take that little bit that we have and offer that sacrifice to him, because he is worthy, because he can take that and multiply it. I feel that if she was not faithful to give that cake to Elijah, she would not have had the unending jar of flour and jug of oil. It would not have happened had she not been faithful to make that cake. You see, it is making that time to make the sacrifice, to prioritize what is important to God. And all of a sudden, you will see God to do his part. And so I have learned some really amazing lessons when going through to study this, to see this. This story really touches my heart, because this is how I've experienced God. In the worst of times that I have seen in my life, I have seen him come through people around me. Those who decided that loving him is the most important thing. Faith in him is the most important thing. And simply taking that step with what you have. So I have a couple of questions for us as we prepare for breakout rooms today. Question number one starts with a statement. Think of a season in your life where you have experienced lack. What did God do to sustain you? So I'll ask that one more time. Think of a season in your life when you have experienced lack. What did God do to sustain you? And then number two, how is your faith doing when you're experiencing lack? One more time, how is your faith doing when you're experiencing lack? So take some time to reflect on that and talk about that in your groups. And I look forward to seeing you all again in a little while, and we'll talk through this together.